And now, the survival show that once survived partying with a disco klezmer band. In this ITRH book club episode, we sit down with the author, Bobby Akart. We discuss his books, how he came to being a prepper, and how he wraps preparedness lessons into his books for you. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 175. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Bobby, welcome to In the Rabbit Hole.
Well, thank you very much, Aaron. I'm glad to be on board with you tonight.
Good deal. So now you are the author of 9 books, and man, that's a lot of writing. I guess do you just put your nose to the grindstone and just bang it out? How does that happen, man? That's a lot of writing.
Well, it's just like anything that if you love what you do, you want to do it 24/7. And when I first started writing, which was January of last year, I had already been writing articles for American Preppers Network and for my own website, which is freedompreppers.com, as well as other preparedness-related blog sites. But I started writing fiction in January for a Kindle World project. It was a novella that someone suggested that I give writing a try years ago. I never knew that I would have a passion for it. But when my first novella hit the number 1 ranking in Kindle Worlds in the action-adventure category after just a few weeks, I thought, hey, maybe I should give this some more serious thought, and I was off and running.
Mm-hmm. So now, before we really dive into the books, you had a great point there about how you came to writing, but I guess let's back up and hear the story. How did you come into writing? And I ask this question of everyone because I often find that writers tend to have it early on and then they come back to it later. What's the story? How did you come to all this?
I focus primarily on sharing the research that I undertook to become a better prepper. My wife and I kind of had our eyes opened when we lived in Las Vegas in 2007, 2008, and we saw the collapse of the housing market and the results of how people reacted to getting underwater on their mortgages, and it kind of concerned us, not so much the economic aspect of it, but the way human beings reacted and what they felt they were allowed to do because they were so-called victims, and that drove us towards a preparedness lifestyle, which we've really embraced for about 6 years now.
So now that's interesting, and I guess to dive into that for a second, what was, in a nutshell, what was that behavior like?
Well, it was interesting because, and ironically, this was during a period of a presidential campaign where there's a lot of rhetoric. I mean, you see the news as I do and everyone else. And during that time frame, it was appropriate to be mad at the lenders who loaned people money to go buy these enormous homes that they couldn't afford. And when they were unable to pay for it, they cried that their mortgage holder was a predatory lender. And so as they moved out of these homes that were being threatened with foreclosure, they would, at least in the Las Vegas area, and we experienced it through the news via L.A. and Phoenix as well, people would tear out the plumbing fixtures. They would remove the lighting fixtures. They would rip the copper wire out of the walls, all in the name of being victims of predatory lending. And it became literally an epidemic across our country. And we saw that society was so fragile and that just this slight tipping of the scales in one direction or the other could cause this kind of activity. And that kind of led us back to East Tennessee and brought us to the Cumberland Plateau, where we found a home that's in the middle of nowhere. So we're a little bit immune to that.
Okay. So the writing itself, was it just kind of on a lark? Did you just sit down and decide to do it, or was it on mention from somebody else?
Well, it's really just something I decided to do. I built a website, and I started writing blogs, articles for my own website based upon the research I undertook. And just to give an example, if I was ready to install a water storage system here at my house, I would research how to catch rainwater, how to purify it, and then how to store it. And so I wrote a series of articles, and I incorporated that into my website. And then I got the attention of the folks over at American Preppers Network, and they asked me if I would consider writing articles for them, and I did, and became a featured writer for them. And just a part of that process made me think perhaps I should take a hand at writing fiction. And so I had become friends with a number of fiction authors, and Stephen Conkley, who is the author of the Perseid Collapse series, just asked me out of the blue one day, have you ever thought about writing fiction? And after, 2 or 3 conversations, I put my nose to the ground and started writing a novella for the Kindle World, and that it turned out pretty well.
Oh, cool. Bobby, let's take a quick break for these important messages. Roving Horde! That's you, dear listener, if you're new here. This is the final episode of this season, and we are now going into the ITRH summer break. The show will be going to the once every 3 weeks show format for the next couple of months. Then the show will return, as always, for season 6, August 1st. Now, just because the show is going on break, that doesn't mean the Roving Horde Armada is. We'll still be chatting it up on our secret ITRH Armada Facebook group, adding benefits to the membership area, and doing our monthly virtual meetup and our 2 in-person monthly meetups if you're here in Houston. Find out more about becoming a supporting member of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada by visiting ITRH.net. Again, the .net is important, so it's ITRH.net. Next up, you and I both love entertaining and engaging audio. It makes drives, yard work, and sometimes our day jobs fly by a little faster. And since you're going to not have ITRH filling your ears like a bunny getting it on with your head, check out audibletrial.com/ITRH. Audible has just about every book you've ever wanted to read in audio format. And it's become my go-to absolute favorite way of consuming great books. When you hit audibletrial.com/ITRH, you'll get a free 30-day trial and a free book of your choosing. So try it out. And hey, you can start with one of Bobby books or one of the Prepper classics like 1 Second After. Again, audibletrial.com/ITRH. Now, back to Bobby. You mentioned another author a second ago. What authors inspire you? Who do you kind of look to, whether it's in prepper fiction or not, just in general?
Yeah, I think most of the writers who I have interacted with over the last couple of years have been avid readers as well, and I put myself in that category. I was an avid reader long before I became a writer. And in the post-apocalyptic genre and political thriller fiction, which is kind of where I am, I started reading first Dr. William Forstyn and James Wesley Rawls. This was, 2010, 2011. They were pretty much it. I mean, they were the ones that were the most popular. Then a number of authors started emerging as the closer we got to the Mayan apocalypse, as you recall, the 12/21, 2012. I mean, it was all over the news. It was on National Geographic Channel and History, et cetera. And a lot of authors sprung up in that time frame, 2011, 2012. My friend Chris Weatherman, who you had on recently, they all came out of that time frame. And so Steve Conkley, Chris Weatherman, Jeff Hopf, Glenn Tate, great authors who put a lot of preparedness concepts into their stories. And I learned from those and of course, couldn't get enough of it. Sadly, as I started writing and devoting so much time and effort into research and writing on my own, my reading list and time has gotten much shorter.
Yeah, I know that. I know how that works.
Well, it's always good to read others' work. These guys, they spend a lot of time, and they're far more experienced than I am. I mean, I'm a newbie rookie compared to the names I just mentioned. So I'm pretty proud that I'm able to be up there and put out a good product. I found that the more I write, the ideas start to just flow in to the point where you can't write 25 books at once, and it's hard sometimes to stick with one subject or series at a time.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Let's dive into the books a little bit. You've got two series. You've got the Boston Brahmin, and it starts with The Loyal Nine is the first book in that series. Walk us into that book for a moment. How does this start?
Well, the Boston Brahmin series and the concept was to take political suspense and kind of lead the story and the plot into a post-apocalyptic world. So what you have in the first two books of the series, which is The Loyal Nine and Cyber Attack, is the development of the characters who have ties to the Founding Fathers. The primary characters in the book have lineage relating back to names like Adams and Ben Franklin, and you can imagine the list could go on. And I did a substantial research on what's known as the Brahmin, the wealthy Brahmin families of New England. And that term was coined by Oliver Wendell Holmes, the father to the famous Supreme Court Justice. And he used to write articles for the Atlantic Monthly magazine in the 1800s. And he basically took all of these wealthy New Englanders, Boston natives, for example, who had roots to the Founding Fathers, and called them the Brahmin, the wealthy Brahmin, and Brahmin is part of the Indian Hindu caste system. So I thought that the premise behind the story is to take these patriotic Americans with this deep roots into the history of our country, and make them relatively ordinary. They are wealthy, which is very unusual for a post-apocalyptic series. Typically, writers put their average characters, maybe guys like you and I who live in a neighborhood or in the woods or something like that. And what I wanted to do is something a little bit different and show folks that, even the wealthy are getting prepared, but the principles are the same. And so in this series, in The Loyal Nine and into the Cyber Attack, which is book 2, these guys start to see that America is collapsing economically, socially, and as I like to say, the country was one bad news story away from total collapse. And at the end of book 2, without giving out too many spoilers, a collapse event occurs which throws the entire nation into chaos. And that takes the book from a political suspense type of series into a post-apocalyptic series. And that's where we are now with books 3 and 4 of the Boston Brahmin series.
Okay. So as a political suspense, it's just following along the story of these families as these wealthy families as they prepare, and I guess what is the catalyst here? Like what do readers walk into that this world that is starting to slowly or maybe quickly kind of grind on itself and perhaps come to a halt is probably the best way I can put it.
Yeah, well, throughout the Loyal Nine and Cyber Attack, the first two books, the readers learn about the Loyal Nine. And the Loyal Nine are 9 characters, again, who are related as friends, but as it turns out, as the story progresses, they have actually been put together by the wealthy Brahmin, led by John Morgan, who was direct descendant of J.P. Morgan and going all the way back to Samuel Adams, and all of that's set out in the book. And Mr. Morgan is wealthy on a level of a George Soros multi-billionaire, and his abilities to manipulate financial markets and politicians all the way up to the ability to call the White House directly and get contact with the president comes out. And the Loyal Nine, who are folks that are either a professor or there's one that's an ex-Navy SEAL, then you have another military guy, then you have a former accountant, et cetera, and his wife. They are preparing and they're giving the funds to get ready, but what they don't realize is that they're also being manipulated by John Morgan and the Boston Brahmin to put themselves in a position to protect the Brahmin in the event of a major collapse event. And as the story unfolds, they'll find that they have been manipulated as part of this conspiracy, and that'll make for some interesting interaction between all of the parties.
Oh, interesting. Sort of like the nine act as this team for the Brahmin.
Right. They all have their own levels of expertise. And, there's a doctor that's retired, a former Army field surgeon. As I mentioned, there's an ex-Navy SEAL. There's someone who is a political editor for the Boston Herald newspaper. There's a professor from Harvard. It's a diverse group with all of them having their own strengths and weaknesses. And they have been pretty much handpicked through a period of many, many years just for the purpose of protecting these Brahmin in the event of a collapse event. Because most people don't realize this, but the wealthiest people in America, the power brokers, the ones who have information and contacts, are going to be aware of a problem that our nation faces long before you and I read about it in the newspaper or see it on TV. And so these guys know that America is subject to collapse, and so they have the Loyal Nine do everything necessary to prepare them. And then during the summer prior to the collapse event itself, things really pick up in terms of their preparedness, and then the proverbial stuff hits the fan, and then there they go. Book 3 is entitled Martial Law, and it's kind of a giveaway, but as soon as the collapse event occurs, the cyber attack, then with martial law, we find our characters in all different parts of the country, and they have to fight their way back to get to their bug out locations.
Okay. When you write, are you primarily just trying to tell a great story in a genre that you're passionate about? Or are you trying to teach readers lessons wrapped in a story? Which way does that work for you?
Well, I have to say that my goal was always to not only entertain but inform. And the informed side can be tedious sometimes because I'm not sure that most readers in this genre are used to being informed to the level I take it. I mean, and this is no exaggeration, I may have 3 or 4 chapters or 3 or 4 paragraphs in a single chapter, and it'll take me all day to research it to make sure that I'm 100% correct and accurate in what I'm writing. And that's just the way I am. I mean, I've always been that way. So as I write the fiction, I try to inform them in a way that it's woven into the story, whereas in a lot of books, for example, you'll just find lists. You'll find a character saying, "Oh well, the EMP is hit, and now I'm going to open up my trunk, and here's my laundry list of everything in my bug out bag." And I don't do it that way. I try to make it as realistic as possible, and I also try to make it that despite the wealth of these Loyal Nine and the characters in this book, they haven't thought of everything, because despite the fact I consider myself a very committed prepper with a wealth of knowledge, I'm sure there will be something that I have not thought about, and that'll be true for anyone who's in the preparedness mindset.
Oh, absolutely. For most of us, it's an intellectual exercise that, since most of us have not survived any kind of collapse, so I think that's right on. There's an interesting point in there for me with James Wesley Rawls's book, his first one, Patriots. It became often cumbersome to read because he was trying to go into such great detail, and it was almost like hitting a speed bump in a story. Do you find that difficult to smoothly weave that information in, or is that something that you've developed a style and you're able to weave in these details that tend to be more technical and sometimes hard to not be dry?
And I know exactly what you're referring to. And when I read Patriots, I found myself. This was when I first bought an iPad way back when. And I was reading on the iPad, and I was constantly pausing or stopping, and I'd make notes. And it was almost like, because I was a new prepper and I was learning so much from that book. But I tried to learn from that. But I'll be honest. I mean, I'm new at this, and I've been writing at such a pace that I haven't had the time to truly sit down and learn how to write. So I'm learning by trial by error. But according to my reviews, apparently I seem to be doing okay. But sometimes I do get burdened and with the details, not of the preparedness side, but I describe some very intricate cyber attacks, especially in book 2 of the Brahmin series, that are dead on accurate. I mean, if somebody were to follow the fictional aspects of the cyber attacks that I write about, they could pretty much do what I described. And so it took a lot of effort to learn that and to work out the details. And it was as part of that process and the extensive research I did to write about these significant, potentially significant events in America that I decided to write nonfiction as well, because I had volumes of research on cyber attacks and cyber warfare and the threats our nation faces from in the cyber realm, and that's what led me to write the Prepping for Tomorrow series.
I'm glad you brought that up. And you had told me before we started recording, we were chatting a little bit. Explain for listeners, what is the Prepping for Tomorrow series?
It's going to be a series of books that I'll probably write at least 3 per year on all aspects of preparedness. And unlike a lot of the prepper handbooks and survival guides out there, these will be full-length books. There's so many of them that are 40, 50 pages, and these are all full-length. But initially what I'm doing is I'm trying to identify for preppers and readers what the potential collapse events are that could throw our nation into chaos. I believe that there are certain events that are more likely than others, but I'm taking them one at a time to show people that there's historic precedent for all of this. And cyber warfare, which I released in October of last year, was the natural start to the Prepping for Tomorrow series, because I'd done so much research on cyber attacks and cyber warfare for the Boston Brahmin series. And I put the book out there in mid-October, not really thinking about categories and such. I picked several, including disaster preparedness, which is probably the most important to preppers. And it turned out that cyber warfare was released at the same time that Ted Koppel released his book entitled Lights Out.
Yeah.
And so here you have Ted Koppel with his name and a big production in terms of him going all over the country and TV interviews, and he had his publisher behind him. And he and I were going back and forth for about a month between the number 1 and number 2 slots.
Oh, wow.
The categories that we were in. It was. I was really proud of that, because you think about as an indie author, we have a lot of challenges that publishing houses don't have, because that's their job. That's what they do. And so for me to be my 3rd full-length book produced and to hit number 1 in all of those categories and beating Ted Koppel several times, I was thrilled with that. And so once again, I saw that there was a potential niche to write these nonfiction preparedness guides. And so I decided to continue the Prepping for Tomorrow series. And the first several installments will be on what I call collapse events, or Teotwaki, the end of the world as we know it events. Things that are more than your what we'll call ordinary run-of-the-mill hurricanes, or rock slides or floods or tornadoes or things. These are big events, some of which could even be extinction level depending upon what happens. But I go into a lot of detail with cyber warfare, and I talk about who the players are on the geopolitical stage that don't like us very much and what their capabilities are. And that book actually got noticed by quite a few folks, which gave me the opportunity to be interviewed by George Noory on Coast to Coast AM in December. And then I finished up a television interview with him about a month ago that is under production right now.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. So these are technical nonfiction books, but how do you lay them out? Like, how does, I guess it's so hard to do technical books well and not put readers to sleep. How do you go about that?
That is very difficult. And I mean, I tend to be someone who does get a little bit caught up in the details. So I put it all on paper, and then I went back and read it and tried to look at it from a different perspective. But each book is of course different. I've written Cyber Warfare, which released in October, covering the whole cyber attack potential. EMP, electromagnetic pulse, released in January. And then Economic Collapse went live today on Amazon. And what I tried to do in the first two books, which are very technical, technology-oriented, is give the best summary I could without throwing people into the weeds too much. Because this book is designed for preppers. It's not designed for scientists or people who know more about the subject matter than I do. What I try to do is take the culmination of all of my research, compile it into a well-organized outline that makes sense, and then provide everyone the facts. Here's how it can happen. Here's where it's happened before. Here's why our country is vulnerable. And then the last part is here's how you can prepare for a cyber attack or an EMP attack or even economic collapse, which is what just came out today.
Okay. So that's interesting. They kind of running the gamut there of potential disasters, and that's a really interesting approach.
I can tell you how I came up with these, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but every January on freedompreppers.com, we do a poll, and I publicize it in various places and have people vote, and we ask preppers, or non-preppers alike, whoever comes to the site, to identify their top concerns, collapse events, if you will, that they prepare for or they think they should be getting prepared for. And so what I'm going to do with these first installments of Prepping for Tomorrow is cover those, cyber warfare and EMP and economic collapse. And some people are concerned about near-Earth objects, and others are concerned about supervolcanoes. Pandemic is high on everybody's list, related to bioterror. What I hope to do with each of these books, and I'll probably write about 6 of the collapse event books, is to show people, like I said, what the events are, what they should be aware of and watch for in the news, and then how to be prepared. Once that part of the series is done, then I'm going to go into specific aspects of preparedness and exactly, what do they need to do, for example, to have your medical supplies in order, to have your security in order. What can you do to go off grid? What should your prepper pantry look like? And I'll write those, over the next several years.
Okay. Now, you told us a little bit about what got you into prep and what sort of woke you up. And most of us have our pet prepper collapse that we're preparing for, or the thing that kind of keeps us awake at night. What's yours, personally?
Well, I believe that cyber attack is probably the most likely to bring down our power grid. And a grid down scenario, to me, regardless of how it happens, would be the ultimate demise of America, because we're so interconnected and folks they don't know how to live. They wouldn't know how to live without power.
Right.
And so a grid down scenario, which would create naturally societal collapse as a result, is the biggest threat to America. And I think if a rogue nation, whether it be Russia or China or North Korea, Iran, heck, even ISIS has the wherewithal financially to hire the people necessary to attack our power grid and bring it to its knees. That is probably the most likely, even more so than a nuclear-delivered EMP or a naturally occurring solar flare resulting in an EMP. The odds are slimmer on the solar flare. The deterrent effect in our own defenses might prevent a nuclear-delivered EMP, but a cyber attack could be done from any country, from anywhere, and the attribution for the attack could be near impossible because they route it through servers all over the world, and we wouldn't even know where it came from.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had a few bestsellers here. Why do you think your books resonate with your readers so deeply that makes them so popular?
Well, that's the best question. I would love to talk to every one of them. I would, in fact, of course, I would enjoy that.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to every reader and say, what did you like about this character? What did you like about this story? It's very hard to tell.
Of
All I
course.
can do is, I look at reviews, but I take those with a grain of salt because, believe it or not, when authors get bad reviews, they do take it personal.
Of
They may
course.
say, "Oh, I don't care," but they do take it personal, and because you put a lot of work and effort into these books that you sell for $3 or $4 or $5. I mean, you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it's tough on you sometimes. But I have to say that the common theme I get from talking with folks via social media or when I get emails is they appreciate the fact that they have some detailed analysis woven into the fictional stories. I spend so much time setting up the Boston Brahmin series in books 1 and 2, showing how society is collapsing around us and how the economy is so fragile. And I can tell you, I've heard this 100 times, that the plots in my books are the headlines of tomorrow, and it happens. I get that every week. So I guess if anything, Jeff Hoff, in fact, called my series prescient, which is, like you can foresee the future over here with
Mm-hmm.
my crystal ball. But I don't know. I just have a knack for paying attention, and I do a lot of research, and I work it into the fiction series so that when people see these headlines, they say, "Heck, Bobby wrote about that a year ago." And I guess that's what I'm most proud of, and I think that's what people like the most.
Okay. And I guess now for our quick lightning round section of questions, what is your prepper pet peeve? Something in the community that either people do or that other authors sometimes write in that drives you crazy?
I think my pet peeve is that there's way too much emphasis put on weapons and the use of guns as a solution to preparedness shortcomings. There's no doubt that you must have weapons to protect yourself. I have a saying that if you can't defend it, it isn't yours,
Mm.
and that's a big aspect of it. But I think too many prepper stories end up being militaristic. You have writers who describe how many feet per second a certain ammo round is traveling
Yes.
before it hits somebody. I mean, that's ridiculous. And
Yes.
that's a pet peeve of mine. And I think from what I've learned, that a vast majority of the readers are women, and they don't care at all about this type of gun or that type of gun and what kind of night sights it has and all of that. So I've
Mhm.
avoided that topic.
Okay. And I have a follow-up question that might just irritate you on that topic, but
That's all right.
before we get to that one, to follow up with something you were just saying, what do you think is the most overlooked thing by most preppers
Well,
or
I
most
think the most
neglected?
overlooked thing is sustainable food sources. When you read a lot of these books, they're heavy on action, and I know a reader wants to be entertained and they want the action. But what is typically left out of a lot of these stories is how are these folks going to nourish themselves, not just in the short run. I mean, it's one thing to go foraging through homes and the Costco and the Walmarts that are closed down, but you have to be able to grow food. You have to be able to harvest the seeds at the end of the year, preserve them for next year's spring planting, and then you have to be able to preserve the foods to last you through the winter. Very few writers go into that because it's not exactly an exciting subject to talk about. Harvesting your crop and pulling out the seeds and canning and getting ready for next year. But it is something that's very important.
Yeah, that's a point I like to often make to people when I'm speaking to them, that they'll eat 3 times every day, but they only get to eat a bullet once. So,
Yeah, I like that.
yeah. So
That's good.
speaking of guns and militaristic stuff, what is since you are somebody who does believe it is important to protect your stuff, what's your go-to rifle?
Well, I actually wrote an article on, I called it Best Weapons for Preppers. And first off, in my opinion, a weapon is a tool. Just
Yes.
like a hammer and a screwdriver has a certain purpose, every weapon has a purpose. And I'd be the first to say that there are folks that are far more knowledgeable and experienced on this subject than I am, especially a lot of the ex-military guys who have written post-apocalyptic books. But if based upon my research and my opinion, I think if you could have a single gun for defense, it would definitely be a shotgun, simply because the ammunition would be readily available. Virtually everybody in the country has a shotgun, or around them somewhere where you can get ammo if you needed to, and it can be used for close quarters or even a little farther away. That is by far, I think, your most versatile. If you could have one gun, that would be it.
Okay. What would you say is the best $100 you've spent on prep?
I would say buying heirloom seeds that I keep stored, and then every year I spend another. Honestly, it is $100 every year. Every December, I buy another $100 worth of heirloom seeds that make sense for our region. We're in Zone 6 here on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, and because over time your older seeds will lose their potency. They don't go bad, but if you have 1,000 seeds in a packet, you may only be able to get something out of 200 of those. So there's nothing more important than seeds to be able to grow food to sustain yourself. And I think they're going to be a very valuable barter item. And that's always something that's written about in fiction and discussed on prepper websites is what's the best item for barter. And, people talk about having 22 caliber ammunition. And I would never trade a bullet to anybody who would come back and use it against me someday. But
that's a good point.
If you have to barter, you can't keep stockpiles of gold in your basement. Have seeds, because not only are you giving somebody an opportunity to live and sustain themselves, but if they can sustain themselves, they're less likely to come back and try to take what you've got, and you can maybe make an ally or a friend as a result.
That's a great point. And to wrap up, what should readers expect from you in the future? We know you've got more books coming out. Let's go there again.
I do, yeah. I as I mentioned, I took a month and a half off here to get caught up on some things around the house and get some of my projects finished. Book 5 in the Boston Brahmin series is titled The Mechanics. I'll put it on pre-order probably sometime in June, which means it'll be available for download in September. The next Prepping for Tomorrow book will come out probably around election time. And I haven't decided which one to write yet. That's one of those things that I'll be out cutting the grass one day and think, hey, I think I'll write about this.
Well, great. So, Bobby, how do they connect with you?
Well, I appreciate you asking that. My website is Bobby Akart, BobbyAkart.com. That has all of my social media contacts. It has my email address. They can sign up for updates and to become a member of my Advanced Readers Club, where they can actually get free books in advance of their release. And that's the best way to start, is go there to see everything I have to offer for them to read and how to contact me.
Awesome. Give us that website one more time.
Okay, it's BobbyAkart.com.
Fantastic. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a little bit about your books with us.
All right. Thank you, Aaron, for having me on.
Links, resources, and the ability to comment on this episode can be found at intherabbithole.com/E175. This is the final episode of this season, and we are now going into the ITRH summer break. The show will be going to the once every 3 weeks show format for the next couple of months. Then the show will return, as always, for Season 6, August 1st. Now, just because the show is going on break, that doesn't mean the Roving Horde Armada is. We'll still be chatting it up on our secret ITRH Armada Facebook group, adding benefits to the membership area, and doing our monthly virtual meetup and our 2 in-person monthly meetups if you're here in Houston. Find out more about becoming a supporting member of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada by visiting ITRH.net. Again, the .net is important, so it's ITRH.net. Next up, you and I both love entertaining and engaging audio. It makes drives, yard work, and sometimes our day jobs fly by a little faster. And since you're going to not have ITRH filling your ears like a bunny getting it on with your head, check out audibletrial.com/ITRH. Audible has just about every book you've ever wanted to read in audio format. And it's become my go-to absolute favorite way of consuming great books. When you hit audibletrial.com/ITRH, you'll get a free 30-day trial and a free book of your choosing. So try it out. And hey, you can start with one of Bobby books or one of the prepper classics like 1 Second After. Again, audibletrial.com/ITRH. With that, we wrap up episode number 175 and season 5 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.